Good morning. Oh, you guys are so much more lively than the first service. You know, every foundation class I've taught, and there's been probably about 40 of them now, I always tell the class that you're the best class that I've ever had. So I get to tell you this morning you are the best audience that I've ever had. Yes, you can applaud yourself for that. So I was sitting here this morning, and I was remembering something that happened to me when I was 7. How many of you remember when you were 7? It was just 10 or 15 years ago for me, so it was really, it's easy to pull up those memories. I had some grandparents that live nearby me, and I used to spend the night with them, and it was a great time to get ice cream and homemade apple pie and all those types of things. And I remember one time visiting them, and I actually think I was more like 5, and they had a lamp that wasn't working. This will give you a little insight into my personality. And so I said, I can fix that. And so they said, okay. And so my grandpa kind of gave me the lamp, and I sat down with it, and I looked at it, and I plugged it in, and I thought, no, it doesn't work. And I thought, it needs to be rewired. So I asked them if they had scissors, and they said, sure. So I cut the cord. You know the punchline here, right? I didn't unplug it when I cut the cord. And I got jolted back like you would not believe. And they came running, of course, because there were sparks. And I obviously was okay, I think. Maybe it's why I'm doing this today. I have no idea. But, it kind of altered life. But there was something about that moment to me that was so, just so real. When we're little kids, we have an incredible curiosity about the world around us. And hopefully we are kind of safe in the way that we explore it, and sometimes we're not. But there's something really beautiful about who we are at that age. We are incredibly curious and inquisitive. I remember later on in life, having had nieces and nephews. At that age, we're kind of in the what's that game. We play it with our parents all the time. We ask them over 100 questions every single day, trying to identify objects and things in the world. Our neighbors recently have a brand new spanking baby. It's actually not a spanking baby, but you know what I mean. It's although that will come, I'm sure, but it's a brand new baby. And I'm thinking as I look at this being how incredibly precious it is. I mean, just really, truly beautiful. And how it is that over the course of the next couple years, it's going to be cataloging all sorts of things in life. It's going to be asking questions about what's this, and then it'll start asking questions about about how does that work, why? And if any of you have had kids, you know that that's a pretty common thing that happens for us, that, we're just immersed when we're around them in the 60 million questions. They ought to be on Jeopardy. I read someplace that between the ages of 2 and 5, we ask 40,000 questions. It's like we are super librarians and we are cataloging all of the things of life, trying to figure out and make sense of the world around us. We are perfect explorers, seeing the things around us without labels and without assumptions. You might say, as Emerson said, all life is an experiment, and boy, do we live it. We feel that way about life. We are in the mode of taking that which is supernatural to us, which is everything, and beginning through our understanding of it to kind of make it natural and part of our everyday process. That phrase, supernatural, is something that Ernest Holmes obviously used. He said there's nothing supernatural about the study of life, at least from a metaphysical viewpoint. That which today seems to be supernatural, after it's thoroughly understood, will be found spontaneously natural. And I think that's really true when we're little kids. Buckminster Fuller, in one of his more brilliant moments, I would say, said, kids are born true scientists. They spontaneously experience and experiment and re-experience everything again. They select, combine, and test. They seek to find order in their experiences. They ask things like, which is the mostest, which is the leastest? They smell, taste, bite, touch, test for hardness, softness, springiness, roughness, smoothness, coldness, warmness. They heft, they shake, they punch, they squeeze, they push, they crush, they rub, and they try to pull things apart. And that's only on the family cat. And then they move on to the dog, But we are natural explorers. Sadly, until about age 5. And studies have shown that about age 5, we begin to slow down our query of the world around us. And in fact, by middle school, we have pretty much left behind this incredible thirst of asking, what's that? Why does it work that way? How is that? What's that got to do with me? Some would say that maybe we stop because we've kind of cataloged our immediate surroundings. And others would say, well, maybe we're encouraged to know and to not ask. You know, when I think of that, I think some of us have thoughts about our school systems and how often we are more encouraging of kids to have the right answer than we are to ask the right question or a question. We're more concerned about how we stack up with one another. I would think that the universe is so incredibly vast, so incredibly diverse, and such a mystery that we would never, ever run out of the things to question and the things to explore. And yet, somehow or another, we do. There's a great book I read this year. It's called A More Beautiful Question. It's written by Warren Berger, and he's talking about how parents are doing their darndest. And for any parents in the room, God bless you, because we do our darndest. He says this, though. He tells this story. He says, it starts innocently enough. My little boy comes up and he says, Dad, why can't I go outside? And Dad says, eventually, he's being asked by his son to explain why it's raining, why the clouds are forming, why he doesn't know why the clouds are forming, why he didn't pay attention in school when he was taught why the clouds form, why his parents didn't care about his education, and it devolves down to the place where he's trying to explain to his child why we're alone in the universe and nobody gives a darn about us. And then it ends inevitably with his telling his child, shut up and eat your French fries. We cut off, not intentionally, we cut off that natural inquiry not only of our kids, but I would suggest even from one another. How many of you really like to have answers? Oh, come on. I am not alone on the planet on this, right? We like to have answers. And especially, I think, when we're really caring about our friends and our families and they're in a query or they're in a question, we want to provide them the answer to those things. But you know, the truth is, we have an innate wisdom, you and I. And it's in the questioning that innate wisdom really, truly flourishes. The moment that we shut down and we think we know it, then life becomes pretty ordinary. It becomes pretty routine. Now, you could say it also becomes safe, Kristin, and you would not have shocked yourself that day when you were 5 years old. But I got to tell you, I would rather live a life where I get shocked occasionally and be in the curiosity of what's around us than I would to live a life where I've cataloged everything and I know what it is. And sometimes that's scary. We're not talking about just questions. John Gardner, who wrote a book called The Art of Self-Renewal, he said this. He said, as we mature, we progressively narrow the scope and variety of our lives. Of all the interests we might pursue, we settle on a few. Of all the people with whom we might associate, we select a small number. We become caught in a web of fixed relationships and lives. And I read that, and I get depressed. Because I don't want to live my life with a small web. I want to live my life expansively. I want to live my life in the wonder of things. I want to live my life with that same curiosity that I had when I was 5, and perhaps you can relate. You know, the thing that I've noticed about life is that no matter how much it may try to narrow in on us, no matter how much it may try to be stagnant or steady, life will have another idea about why we're here. There's sometimes, I think, really two different ways that we can live our life. We can live with the little story that we often tell about the activities and the things that go on every single day of our lives. We can talk about the conflicts and the challenges and the triumphs. And then we can also live our life in a way in which we are telling the big story about who we are. And I would suggest in simple form that who we are is an amazing soul on a spiritual journey to awaken to our magnificence. And sometimes we get trapped in the little story, just like sometimes we get in those routines. The big story of this lifetime, though, is not to be thwarted. It will not be denied. I was listening to a song yesterday by Jamie Lula. It's one of my favorites. It's "Something is Calling Me," a little bit deeper than I've ever been before. I guess in a sense today what I'm really inviting us to is to listen to that, what's calling us, and to shake things up a bit, to go ahead and plug a few lamps in and get shocked, and to be on the edge of not only our understanding but our lives that at some point in time in this form will indeed come to an end. But sometimes we put up resistance to it. And one of the most impactful books I've read in the last couple years is a book by Richard Rohr. He wrote Falling Upward, Spirituality for the Second Half of Life. I'm actually only in my third part of life, but it still works. The second half of life. What he talks about is how the first half of our life, we are in the process of having completed our catalog, of accomplishing things, of making sure that we're successful and that we feel our power and our strength. As Dr. Kathy Hearn used to say, it's a time, if you're in metaphysics, where you manifest parking places, palaces, and princesses. It's where we know that we're creative beings. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But what Rohr describes is that if life is really about our journey of our soul unfolding forever and ever and awakening to its true magnificent self in new and amazing ways, then we're not done with just manifesting parking places, princesses, and palaces. That there's something else for us. And what he describes is that if we don't get that message, then life will give us that message for it. It'll deliver some 2x4s, what he describes as the fall. How many of you have ever had a 2x4? Coming out of nowhere that all of a sudden just goes whack. I thought this was the job I was going to have for life. I thought this was the relationship I was going to have for life. I thought I was a healthy being and doing everything I needed, and here comes an illness, or here comes a financial challenge, or whatever it may be. And what he describes is that we have two ways of dealing when that happens. Number one, we can be misery and we can continue to tell the little story of our lives to our friends and our family and everybody that will listen. And there's a lot of us that will listen. And number two, we can say, what's the bigger story? What else is unfolding here? In a sense, those 2x4s disrupt our I've got it figured out and now I just get to play it out mentality. It disrupts our I've got it figured out and now I just need to play it out mentality. It puts us in a place, if we're lucky, where we begin to experience life again from a place of wonder. And the wonder sometimes is painful. Absolutely. But the wonder puts us back on the edge to basically say, maybe I don't know all of the answers. Maybe there's something else for me here. So today the title's Life-Bending Experience. Life-Bending Experiments. And I would say that rather than having life bend me, I would like to bend it first. Rather than getting set in my ways and having the 2x4s come by, although when they come, I will still embrace them. Thank you very much. I've learned that much. I want to do some bending on my own. Ernest Holmes said it follows that the range of our possibilities at the present time does not extend beyond the range of our present concepts. And present concepts grow as we experiment with this gift of life. I would suggest that perhaps we shouldn't leave things to chance. John Gardner, again in The Art of Self-Renewal, says, exploration of the full range of our potential is not something that the self-renewing man leaves to chance. It is something that he pursues systematically, or at least avidly, to the end of his days. He looks forward to the endless and unpredictable dialogue between his potentials and the claims on life, not only the claims he encounters but also the ones that he invents himself. And by potential, I mean not just skills, but the full range of his capacities for sensing, wondering, learning, understanding, loving, and aspiring. What I'm really inviting us today is to shake it up. To say, okay, what would happen if I found a few lamps to fix and stepped out of my comfort zone. So I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about a couple things that you might want to consider if you want to be, like me, crazy. And see if you can actually bend life before it happens to you, before it has its way, so that we might actually be present for all of its grandeur. So the first thing that I think about is that experimenters live with an awareness all the time of the big story of our lives. They find all sorts of ways to remind themselves in any given moment that, yes, this is what's happening in the little reality of my life, but there is something far greater in the large R, the capital R, reality of my life. When we live with that big story awareness, we understand that we can live the little details of our lives with the context of what's happening on the larger scale of our soul's unfoldment. Someone said our lives, with all their miracles and wonders, are merely a discontinuous string of incidents until we create the narrative that gives them meaning. Actually, I think the someone was me. That was pretty good. Let me read that again. Our lives, with all of their miracles and their wonders, are merely a discontinuous string of incidents until we create the narrative that gives them meaning. Experimenters remember this. They remember that there's a larger truth. No matter what the conditions, they don't get caught up in the preconceived labels and judgments, and they have a huge expectancy of breakthrough. You know, one of the things that I've come to realize is that spiritual community, in its simplest form as we describe it to one another, is really a place where we get to tell the little stories of the incidents and the things that happen, the stories of life, but we do so always listening for and being surrounded by folks that will help us find the larger context. That's what spiritual community is. It's not a place where we banish the stories of the little things. It's not a place where we don't tell the truth about, I feel trapped in this or I'm struggling with this. It's a place where we do all that, but we have voices around us that also help to guide us to say, and what's the larger spiritual truth of your life? What else is unfolding here? There are people in our lives that put us back into that questioning mode, back into the place that says, I don't have the answer to this. And you know, in a sense, our spiritual leaders do the same thing. In fact, in that way, we're all spiritual leaders. It's the person at the time that's able to say, beyond this field that I'm living in is a greater field, a greater truth of who I am. And so we have these big stories and we have the little stories, and experimenters are the ones that make a dedicated decision to always bring forth the larger context of their lives. They also hold the assumptions that we have tended to make in life as transient. They hold the assumptions that we've tended to make in life as transient. They don't hold that this is who I am and it will always be that way. I said this morning at the first service that I have been incredibly blessed, and actually you can applaud on this. I have been incredibly blessed with a beautiful relationship in my life for 25 years, which is an accomplishment, yes? And over the years, we've had people say, so what's the secret? You know, how did you stay together so long? Especially since I'm 32. That's a pretty significant accomplishment. That probably won't work. Okay. So, sometimes we answer it with, you know, the words of wisdom and the things that you've learned about relationships. But those questions also cause me and us to look back at the times when we weren't making it. And there are 3 in 25 years, which is probably a miracle in and of itself. There are 3 times that we've had what I call the skinny branch experience. You know what I mean by that? It's the time when you're with each other and something inside of you says, this one's being recorded, right? Okay. Holy cow. I'm not sure we're going to make it through this. That's a skinny branch moment. It's the moment in which you think, my world may just crumble and we may not get through this, whatever it is. But see, here's the thing that I've learned about that. Those skinny branch moments all have a common theme, and the common theme is that we have locked onto an assumption about one another that we are not willing to let go of. Assumptions kill relationships. Assumptions kill the spirit in us that wants to really, truly fly and discover it and awaken to the beauty that we are. And so this idea of holding assumptions as transient is a really powerful one for me personally. It doesn't mean I don't have the assumptions. We all do. It means I just don't hold them as the sacredness of all eternity. And I give them and each other and the people in my lives and the ideas that I've already cataloged, I give them room to be different, to change. How many of you have ever changed a career in your life? I can remember when I was first graduating from college, somebody said in the next lifespan, generation, people are going to change careers 10 times. And I thought, no. I love what I'm doing. I love what I studied. I love the business world. It was really fun. And then all of a sudden, I was driving home one day, and I had this little voice that said, God does not say, been there, done that, and you have been saying that a lot. And something inside said, I think it's time. And I let go. I let go of that career, and several months later, I stepped into ministry, and I did not know that was going to happen. I started ministerial school. And so there's something that happens in us routinely in life if we're willing to let go of the assumptions about who we already are. I assumed that as I stepped into church ministry, that this would be it for the rest of my life. Namaste celebrates 15 years. As I know you guys are aware, you celebrate 60 in this community and 20 with Dr. Edward. I assumed that church ministry would be it for my whole life until I had something happen on a Sunday morning just several months ago. And I want to read what this was because it shook me up. And it caused that same little voice that said, oh my word, you're about to make a change. It's out of a book called The Great Work of Your Life. It's written by Stephen Cope. And he's talking about this woman, her name is Catherine, who has been many years the dean of a very small private girls' school. Unbelievably loved, loves her job, has loved it forever, watched generations of families and girls go through her school and just felt incredibly blessed and all that. And something inside of her was beginning to stir, though, where she felt like the passion and the place where she was really truly on the edge and able to inspire and explore the supernatural around her, to feel on fire, it was starting to dim. And what she described to him was that she was terrified because she really didn't know what was going to come next. She didn't know what else she would be. In fact, her whole identity was tied up in, this is who I am. This is what I do in life. Anybody can relate to this one? And that whole thing about having our identity locked up in that just keeps us kind of paralyzed for a while. I want to read this passage. We might call Catherine's version fear of closing the door. I see this version quite frequently. Someone has had a profound taste of living their dharma, maybe even for decades, but now that particular dharma is used up and lived out. I didn't know dharma could be used up and lived out. You can smell it. The person knows that a certain dharma moment is over, but has only the vaguest sense what might be next. And it increasingly begins to dawn on her that in order to find the next expression of dharma, she's going to have to take some leap. She knows that she's going to have to close a door behind her before she opens the next door, and gradually she comes to the edge of the cliff where she knows that a leap of faith is going to be required. And there she sits, opens up her folding chair, and sits. And waits. Sits and waits like something else is going to knock us upside the head and say it's time to shift. Stephen Cope talks about how dharma, even the most sacred things in our life that we are absolutely sure are never going to change, will have a way of moving, not because life is against us or bad or because we're fickle people, but because there is a spiritual truth of you and I that knows absolutely no boundaries to the expression and the experience in its life. And when I read that at service a couple months ago, something inside of me said, oh my word, I've been sitting in this folding chair for a couple months now. In fact, maybe a year or so. And I knew in that moment, although it took me a while to be able to articulate that answer and come to grips with that answer, was that I needed to make a leap. And so a couple weeks ago, I let my community know that after 15 years, as we celebrate that anniversary, it's time for me to allow Spirit to write the next chapter in my life. And that's one of the ways that I described it. And I have to tell you, that's a scary thing. It's a scary thing for a community when a minister does that, but it's a scary thing in our lives. But I share it because there are so many of us that are hanging on to the folding chair, and there are so many of us that are not willing to even try to plug the lamp in and fix it because we've just sort of been seduced into, well, this is how it is. And if there's one message I think that perhaps I have, and perhaps I have in my continuing ministry in whatever form it takes, it's to not let this opportunity pass us by. To use every single moment we have in every part of our day to allow our soul to really, truly express the magnificence that it is in all of the forms. Because that little story is just about forms. The big story is the truth of who we are. Years ago, I shared an analogy with my community. I didn't think that I was going to be living it. And by the way, if you come to Namaste, one of the things often you will hear people say is, come to Namaste, quit your job. You know, because we tend to shake things up, right? I mean, we invite people into their magnificence, into their gifts. So we do that in community for one another. I didn't know it was going to be me, though. You know, I didn't know that was going to apply to me. So years ago, I told the analogy, which you've probably heard, about the trapeze. You know, here we are swinging on the bar, happy as clams and broth, whatever that. I just made that up. I don't know. We're happy, right? Life is good. We got a grip. We know everything about this journey and this swing, and it's comfy. And all of a sudden, we get this little inkling of something on the other part of the field over there that just looks like a bar, but it doesn't look very comfortable, and we can't quite make it out. And then there's something inside of us that said, but maybe it's time to let go and go grab that one. And we kind of look at the gulf in between, and we go, no way. And then to make things worse, a big fog rolls in. So even if we thought we could see the bar, now we can't see it at all, but something inside still says, but I know it's out there. And so when that moment happens, there's some part of us that says, let go. Let go. And the moment that we do, we find ourselves floating in this most beautiful sea. We find ourselves floating in the ethers of the divine. And it's in that place, that very beautiful, peaceful place, that everything that we could possibly imagine is given to us. It's in that place that we have allowed Spirit room to play with our lives. We've allowed Spirit to say, welcome to this amazing, uncategorized, uncategoried part of life. Because I have something more grand and more beautiful in store for you. Abraham said, you did not say, let's go forth into this physical experience and take all the ideas that exist and whittle them down to just a few good ideas that we can then all agree on and peacefully cohabitate. Instead, you said, let's go forth and take the ideas that exist and expand on them. Let's take the contrast to be more, so that the desires can be more, so that the energy will have more avenues through which to flow. Be an experimenter. Use every moment of this life. Break the rules. Let go of the assumptions. Find the big story. And be willing to be in that place that Holmes so beautifully talked about, which is the supernatural.